When my sons were in grade 7 and 8, I forgot the term. I was going to say middle school. Senior elementary school, there you go. At Stanley Park School. They were in classes with the Walzer kids. Henry Walzer, the funeral home director. They never told me stories like this, but there's this delightful story of a 4-year-old son of a funeral director. And the funeral director decided on Easter Sunday that he would take his family to church for the first time. And the 4-year-old's in Sunday school, and the Sunday school teacher is talking excitedly about how Jesus rose from the dead and is alive. And this 4-year-old boy is looking rather bewildered, and he says, do you really mean that Jesus rose from the dead? That he's not dead? He's alive? And the teacher, nodding her head, yes, absolutely, she says, he is risen from the dead. He is alive. He's not dead anymore. And the little boy, looking rather bewildered, starts to shake his head no, and said to the group, well, I know that my daddy didn't work on him because none of the people my daddy works ever get up. Maybe that little boy was somehow distantly related to Thomas, whom we had for centuries called Doubting Thomas. Thomas heard from the other 10 disciples that they had seen the risen Jesus in their midst, that he had blessed them with peace and sent them on a mission. And we'll talk about the mission in a moment, maybe, if I remember. But they were so excited, they were animated, I'm sure, as they're telling Thomas. And you know Thomas's response. Yeah, right. Uh-huh. Mm-mm. Dead people don't get up. Who are you trying to fool? Unless I see the wounds with my own eyes, and I put my finger in the nail holes in his hands, and I put my hand in his side where the spear went in, I will not believe you. A little defiant humanity expressed beautifully through Thomas there. Once you're dead, you're dead. You ever heard somebody say that to you? I've heard people say that to me all the time. Once you're dead, you're dead. But I wonder, did Thomas forget about Lazarus? And what Jesus did? Or the widow's son from Nain? It's absurd, isn't it? To think, what do you mean somebody got up from the dead and they're no longer dead? Thomas needed to touch and feel. He needed to see with his own eyes before he could believe. Thomas, like many, if not all humans, at some point in our lives, lived by the motto, seeing is believing. During his long career as pastor of New York's Riverside Church, the late Harry Emerson Fosdick spent many hours in his office counseling the students from the nearby Columbia University. And one evening, a young man burst into his office and said to him, I have decided that I cannot and do not believe in God. And Dr. Fosdick replied, oh, okay. But can you describe for me the God that you're not believing in? All right. So the student sketched out his understanding, his image of God. And when the student finished, Dr. Fosdick said, well, we're in the same boat. I can't believe in that God either. I wonder if that might have been part of the motivation behind Thomas's doubt. The God that he believed in versus the God made present to the world in the flesh through his Son, Jesus Christ. We're not the same. Thomas thought he knew who God was and thought he knew who Jesus was, a rather great man who died horribly on a cross and is buried in the tomb. Maybe it was that clause of the Last Supper that Jesus shared with them in that upper room, in which Jesus said, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." Whatever the case, Jesus did not condemn Thomas for his doubt. Have any of you ever doubted?
Sure.
Oh, I'll narrow it down. Ever doubted your faith? Doubted God?
Hmm.
Yes, thank you, Arthur, for your honesty. And Enid, thank you. Yeah, we all do. And yes, I just said we, including me, with you. We all do. Jesus didn't condemn Thomas for his doubt. Neither does he ever condemn us in our times of doubt. And Jesus, in fact, used the moment of doubt in Thomas's life as a teaching moment about faith, about trust, about belief. Doubt is not bad. Doubt is not wrong. Doubt is not a sin. It's like anger is not a sin. But what you do in it and with it can make it sinful. Doubt is actually quite a useful tool in our faith. In the Presbyterian Church in Canada's statement on faith called Living Faith, there's a chapter, a section, that is broken up into two: doubt and faith. Because they go in many ways, they go hand in hand. They help in our life. Otherwise, we might fall for the gospel of anybody and everybody. Or we might believe works of fiction like the Da Vinci Code as being gospel truth. Doubt can act like a filter in our hearts and lives. Robert Strand wrote, quote, "Faith lives in the same apartment building as doubt. When Faith was out of town visiting her uncle in the hospital, doubt fed the cat and watered the ferns. Faith is comfortable with doubt because she grew up with him. Their mothers are cousins. Faith isn't dogmatic about her beliefs like some of her relatives. Her friends, though, fear that Faith is a bit, they whisper she's naive and she depends on doubt to protect her from the meanness and the nastiness of life. In fact, it's the other way around. Faith protects doubt from becoming cynicism." End quote. Somebody else wrote, "I spent 20 years trying to come to terms with all of my doubts. And then one day it dawned on me that I'd better come to terms with my faith. Now I've passed from the agony of questions that I can't answer to the agony of answers I can't escape. And it's a great relief." You ever think about it that way? Maybe that's what Thomas felt, with Jesus taking his doubts seriously. He didn't dismiss it. He didn't dismiss or ridicule Thomas for his doubts. Instead, Jesus offered Thomas the proof that he needed, even though it was a rather time-sensitive proof, because Jesus in the flesh would not be in front of them for much longer. He would not be physically present much longer. Thomas, I like to think, is a lot like most other people, desperately wanting to believe, desperately hungering for hope that there is something way bigger than this life, and that it doesn't just end when we die. But Thomas, like many of us, was a realist. He saw the bloodied and battered Jesus nailed to a cross. He saw Jesus die. He saw the Roman spear go into the side of Jesus. He saw them bring Jesus down from the cross and put into a tomb that was sealed. And he knew that what we call Easter Sunday was 3 days later. Probably like Lazarus, a stinking corpse in the tomb, except he wasn't there. Thomas desperately wanted to believe, but there were so many things So many unknown variables, so many unanswered questions getting in the way. And Jesus knew all that. He understood completely where Thomas was coming from. We all don't come to God the same way. We all don't believe the same way. And Jesus meets each of us exactly where we are, in the midst of whatever doubts and struggles we might be having. In his book, that Jerry Cook wrote, and he called it, "Some Things That I Have Learned Since I Knew It All." He tells about having open heart surgery. After he recovered and was now at home, he had a visit from a man who was fearfully facing the prospect of his own open heart bypass surgery. The surgeon, same surgeon, had referred the new man to Jerry. The man said shyly, explained the situation and asked, "May I please see your scars?" So Jerry said he took off his shirt, and the man gently traced the purplish scar going down the center of Jerry's chest. And the man said, "The doctor tells me the most painful part of the operation will most likely be on my legs, because they're going to take veins from my calves to use for the bypass of my heart. May I please look at your legs?" He asked, unashamed of it. So Jerry rolled up his pants and the man knelt down. And he looked and he touched the scars on Jerry's calves. And when the man got up, he was crying. And he said to Jerry, "Thank you. Now I have hope." For Thomas, Jesus was standing right there. The wounds, the scars, very visible. Jesus even offered for Thomas to touch and to put his hand in his side where the hole was from the spear. Jesus was standing right there before Thomas, standing alive, proving to Thomas that death he had conquered. Touching Jesus' scars, having the opportunity to touch the scars, helped move Thomas from doubting to believing, gave him hope. Hope about the meaning of life, the meaning of his life. Hope that life really does matter. Hope that Jesus' words and teachings, his life, his death, and his resurrection were meaningful, purposeful, and were true. Hope that translates into the fact that the Easter story is not just a story, that it's God's truth to give us hope. That Easter work, the tomb is empty, the cross is vacant, Jesus is risen. Thomas was able to touch, and he was able to feel, if he so chose to, with Jesus standing right there before him. But you and I don't have that choice. All we can do is, as the psalmist said in Psalm 34, verse 8, "Go taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed are those who take refuge in him." All we can do is taste and see. Believe. Last week was Easter Sunday, and we celebrated the Feast of the Resurrection, the Lord's Supper, Holy Communion, the Eucharist. That's as close as we get to being in Thomas's literal shoes when Jesus invited Thomas to touch and to feel. We got to touch the bread and to hold the juice in our hands. We got to taste the body and the blood of Christ in our hearts of faith. And we got to see and to believe. Every time we celebrate the Lord's Supper, Christ invites us to extend our hands. Not quite like Thomas was invited to extend his hands and to touch the wounds. But we're invited by Christ, the risen Lord, every time we celebrate communion, to reach out our hands and receive the body and blood of Christ. The sacrament that symbolizes and embodies his sacrifice for us in our place on the cross. And just as Jesus gave Thomas hope and a future, the promise of life, when he stood there before him in that upper room, every time we celebrate the Lord's Supper, we also are given new hope. He reminds us of our future and our hope, our life with him forever. And all we're asked to do is to taste and to see and to believe. But then, tasting and seeing and believing a little bit more moves us into seeing Jesus more easily or more clearly in our everyday lives. And then we recognize that Jesus invites all of us, not just me, not just Janet playing music, all of us. The risen Lord invites us all to make Jesus real to all the people we interact with on a daily basis, whether we only meet them once and never again, or we meet them every single day. The early church made its faith real, tangible, by the way it lived and served people, and has done so ever since for the last 2,000 years. Faith, another word is believing, is not simply some inside warming, mushy, feeling good feeling that we gain week by week. And then between Sunday night and next Saturday night, that feeling slowly fades away, and so we come back to be recharged with a good, mushy, warm feeling again. That's not faith at all. Faith must translate into a way of life. The earliest Christians, you know what they were called first? People of the way. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. They were known as people of the way of Jesus. Our faith, our believing must translate into a way of living for others as expressions of our belief and our love for God. As the New Testament book of Acts of the Apostles leads us to understand, seeing is connected with the birth of faith. For people see how Christians live, and they conclude from that seeing if it's all real or not. If Jesus is risen and alive or not. So will you and I live in such ways of care and compassion, of forgiveness, of gracious love and gentleness, that people will be able to touch and feel and taste and see that Jesus is alive, and so be inspired by seeing and feeling Jesus in our lives, that they will live for him too.